I got up on a chair and I told everybody, now is our time to unionize. I said, all the publicity's gone out on WrestleMania. I said, if we refuse to wrestle unless union negotiators are brought in, it's federal law. They have to be brought in. It's the law.
When the legendary Undertaker calls you out publicly, you know you've messed up in a big way. And Hulk Hogan messed up bad. From backstage scandals to a racist rant caught on tape, the Undertaker is finally exposing why so many WWE wrestlers can't stand him. And once you hear the truth, you might feel the same. So let's get into how Hogan destroyed wrestling's first union. When you think of Hulk Hogan, you probably picture the larger-than-life superhero who told kids to say their prayers and eat their vitamins. Or maybe you remember the iconic yellow and red, the leg drop that toppled Andre the Giant, or the New World Order heel turn that shocked the wrestling world. But behind that carefully crafted image lies a much darker story, one of betrayal, manipulation, and self-serving politics that pushed many of his fellow wrestlers, including The Undertaker, to turn against him for good. Perhaps the most damning revelation about Hulk Hogan's character is his role in one of wrestling's greatest betrayals, and to grasp the weight of it, we need to rewind to 1986, right before WrestleMania 2. The wrestling business was booming, but the wrestlers themselves were struggling under conditions that would make any modern labor advocate weep. They were classified as independent contractors, which meant no health insurance, no unemployment benefits, and no job security whatsoever. These men and women were breaking their bodies night after night, traveling nearly 300 days a year, and many were left with nothing but chronic pain and empty bank accounts. Jesse "The Body" Ventura had just returned from filming Predator in 1987, where he worked alongside actors who were protected by the Screen Actors Guild, and the contrast couldn't have been clearer. His Hollywood colleagues enjoyed health coverage, retirement plans, and union protection, while wrestlers were left to fend for themselves in an industry that chewed them up and spit them out.
Obviously, he gets caught on tape, saying some derogatory, racist thing.
The logic was bulletproof. With all the media attention locked on WrestleMania, if the wrestlers refused to perform until union negotiators were brought in, federal law would force WWE to comply.
Right now, I pay $5,000 a year for health care for my family. If we had a union, I might only have to pay $1,250. Because there's strength in numbers.
Sure.
I said, what about all the guys I've seen that give 30 years to this business, and in the end, they ain't got a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of? If we had a union, maybe they could retire with $500 a month. Something.
Ventura wasn't just thinking about himself. He was thinking about every wrestler who had given their body and soul to the business, only to be discarded once they could no longer perform. He painted a vivid picture of what union protection could mean. Reduced healthcare costs, retirement benefits, and basic dignity for workers who had entertained millions yet had nothing to show for it in their later years. The spark for this movement came from an unlikely encounter that Ventura would never forget.
In Las Vegas, and I got on an elevator. And you know who got on the elevator with me?
Who?
A great big offensive guard from the Oakland Raiders by the name of Gene Upshaw. Do you know who Gene Upshaw was?
Yeah.
Head of the NFL Players Association. I got on that elevator and Gene Upshaw, I said, "Hi, Gene. Hey, Jesse, nice to meet you." Gene's big black finger went up in the air and he goes, "You boys need a union."
That simple statement from Gene Upshaw lit a fire in Ventura that carried him to this crucial moment in wrestling history. Here was the head of one of the most powerful labor unions in professional sports, telling him point blank what needed to be done. And Ventura took that message to heart, determined to make wrestling history. But then came the betrayal that would haunt the industry for decades.
Gave my impassioned speech, right? The next day I go home, my phone rings, it's Vince, the union.
But how did Vince know? The locker room meeting was supposed to be private, just wrestlers talking to wrestlers about their futures. No WWE officials were present, no cameras, no recording devices. So how did word reach the boss so quickly? The answer remained a mystery for years, eating away at Ventura like a cancer. He knew someone had betrayed not just him, but every wrestler in that room. Someone who had chosen their personal relationship with management over the collective good of their colleagues. But who?
Me and my lawyer flew to Connecticut. Stooge, yeah, off a Stooge.
Every locker room had someone willing to curry favor with management by reporting on their fellow wrestlers. And these individuals were universally despised, seen as traitors to the brotherhood that was supposed to exist among performers who literally trusted each other with their lives every night. During the lawsuit proceedings, Ventura's attorney saw the chance to finally uncover the truth.
The attorney says to Vince, "Mr. McMahon," he said, has there ever been a union in wrestling? And Vince goes, no. Has anyone ever tried to form one? And Vince paused a moment. He said, yeah. He said, I think Jesse Ventura spouted his mouth off about it one time, years ago. My attorney said, really? He said, how did you know did you hear Mr. Ventura? Talk about unionizing?
Yeah.
And Vince said, no.
The trap was set perfectly. If McMahon hadn't heard Ventura directly, then how did he know about the union attempt? The very next question would expose one of wrestling's most shocking betrayals.
And how did you know? With no hesitation. Vince answered, Hulk Hogan told me. Now, he's under sworn deposition here. He's under sworn deposition to tell the truth.
Yeah.
There was no hesitation. Hulk Hogan told me.
The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Hulk Hogan, the supposed leader of the locker room, the biggest star in the company, the man who preached about doing the right thing, had been the one to betray his fellow wrestlers. Under oath, with the penalty of perjury hanging over his head, Vince McMahon confirmed what many had suspected, but never knew for certain. This wasn't just Ventura's word against Hogan's.
Vince also admitted it to Larry King when he was on Larry King, because Larry King brought it up. Is it true that Hulk Hogan's the one that ratted Jesse Ventura when he tried to unionize wrestling? And Vince said, yeah.
But why would Hogan do such a thing? The answer reveals the depths of his selfishness and explains why so many wrestlers came to despise him. Jesse Ventura later discovered during his lawsuit that Hogan was earning more than the entire WrestleMania 3 roster combined. A clear sign that he prioritized his lucrative position over the collective good. Think about that. While other wrestlers were struggling to pay for basic health care, while legends like Andre the Giant were working through agonizing pain without proper medical support, and while future Hall of Famers faced the prospect of poverty and retirement, Hulk Hogan was making more money than all of them put together. He had no incentive to rock the boat, because the system that crushed everyone else was making him incredibly wealthy.
When I came back to Vince, I said, you don't need to worry about me. If these dummies don't want to protect themselves, screw them. I tried. I said, I got my SAG card. And I'm on retirement right now. I started at age 70. Started collecting, and I made it up to where I make over $50,000 a year in SAG retirement.
Ventura's bitterness is unmistakable in his voice. A man who tried to help his colleagues only to be betrayed by the very person they all looked up to as a leader. The long-term consequences of Hogan's betrayal cannot be overstated, as professional wrestling remains one of the few major entertainment industries without union representation. Even today, wrestlers still face many of the same challenges Ventura tried to address back in 1986, classified as independent contractors without health insurance, unemployment benefits, or job security. How many careers could have been saved? How many wrestlers could have retired with dignity instead of dying broke and broken? Decades later, Ventura's anger hasn't cooled, because that union betrayal set the template for how Hogan operated throughout his career, appearing to be the good guy on the surface while working behind the scenes to protect his own interests, even at the expense of his colleagues. This pattern would repeat itself again and again, building a mountain of resentment among wrestlers who came to believe that Hogan was willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to keep himself at the top of the wrestling world. If Jesse Ventura's union betrayal showed Hogan's willingness to trade the collective good for personal gain, the stories that followed revealed something even darker. A pattern of manipulation and political maneuvering that destroyed individual careers, damaged entire wrestling promotions, and poisoned the industry until it became Hogan's personal playground. The most powerful weapon in his arsenal wasn't the leg drop or even his charisma. It was something far more dangerous: creative control. This contractual clause, which became Hogan's trademark demand, gave him the power to veto any storyline or match finish he didn't like. While it might sound reasonable for a top star, in Hogan's hands, it became a weapon of mass destruction, leaving behind a trail of damaged careers and shattered dreams. Perhaps no incident better illustrates the devastating impact of Hogan's politicking than WCW Starrcade 1997. This wasn't just another wrestling match. It was the culmination of over a year of storytelling, the moment when Sting was finally set to defeat the leader of the New World Order and reclaim WCW for the good guys. The wrestling world had been building to this showdown, and fans were electric with anticipation, but Hogan had other plans. He allegedly refused to lose cleanly to Sting, resulting in a convoluted finish with referee Nick Patrick delivering a questionable fast count, an ending that muddled the outcome and robbed Sting of his defining moment. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Instead of a triumphant moment that would have cemented Sting as WCW's top babyface and delivered a satisfying conclusion to the biggest storyline in the company's history, fans were left confused and disappointed. The botched finish took what should have been wrestling's equivalent of Luke Skywalker defeating Darth Vader and turned it into a muddled mess that satisfied no one. But Starrcade 1997 wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern. Eric Bischoff claimed Hogan only used his creative control once, but accounts from Sting and others suggest Hogan's refusal to put him over was not an exception, but a recurring theme. And that reveals something crucial about how Hogan truly operated. Hogan didn't always need to explicitly use his contractual power. Just the threat of it was enough to get his way. And the damage he caused wasn't limited to WCW. Back in WWE, his political maneuvering had already begun destroying careers and derailing storylines. One of the most egregious examples involved Bret Hart, who was positioned as WWE's next top star after Hogan's departure. At WrestleMania 9 in 1993, Hart had won the WWE Championship from Ric Flair, and the company was ready to build around him. But Hogan, who still held enormous sway with Vince McMahon, allegedly refused to drop the title to Hart, dismissing him as too small to be the face of the company. The Hart incident perfectly captured everything wrong with Hogan's approach to the wrestling business, because instead of doing what was best for WWE and helping elevate the next generation, Hogan used his political power to hold back a superior performer simply to protect his own spot. Hogan's political influence wasn't just about protecting himself, it was also about elevating his friends and allies, often at the expense of more deserving talent. In WCW, he pushed for contracts for his inner circle, names like Brutus Beefcake, Earthquake, and Typhoon, prioritizing loyalty over the rising stars the company desperately needed. The most notorious example of this nepotism came at Starrcade 1994, when Hogan insisted on facing Beefcake, repackaged as The Butcher, instead of delivering a dream match with Sting, resulting in a pay-per-view that fans widely panned. And then there was the situation with Scott Steiner, which opened yet another window into how Hogan operated behind the scenes.
Got beat my first, match after turning heel. The call was made by Hulk Hogan to have me get beat. And the only reason I knew that because I knew somebody that was in the vicinity of talking to him.
Here we see Hogan's political influence in its most petty form. Scott Steiner had just undergone a major character change, reinventing himself as Big Papa Pump, one of the most charismatic and entertaining personas in wrestling history. This should have been the start of a massive push for Steiner. But instead, Hogan used his backstage power to make sure Steiner lost his very first match under the new character, effectively sabotaging what could have been a star-making moment.
We did a Nitro in Buffalo, and I knew who I had to wrestle, per se. But 10 minutes before the shows go on air, 10 to 8, I didn't know if it was going to happen or not. We had to wait till Hogan got to the building and say, clear it. Yeah, you can do what they have written down. He's a fucker. There's no other way he can say it, Yeah.
Steiner's blunt assessment may sound harsh, but it captured the genuine anger and frustration of wrestlers whose careers were manipulated by Hogan's political games. This wasn't professional jealousy or sour grapes. It was the reaction of a talented performer who had been deliberately held back by someone who viewed him as a threat. Hogan's backstage maneuvering seeped into every corner of WCW's operations. His feud with Vader in 1995 collapsed when both accused the other of not selling, a clear example of his unwillingness to compromise. Even when working with established main event stars like Vader, Hogan's ego and need for control made it nearly impossible to create the compelling matches and storylines fans expected. But perhaps the most damaging part of Hogan's political reign was the way it poisoned entire wrestling promotions. With WCW's eventual downfall tied in part to the toxic environment, fueled by Hogan's contract demands and creative control. Hogan's refusal to lose in WCW contributed to the company's decline, with executives later pointing to his contract as a massive financial burden. The pattern didn't stop there. When Hogan moved to TNA Wrestling later in his career, the same behavior followed. TNA wrestlers felt that his obsession with recycling NWO-style storylines and pushing his allies, like Sean Morley, stifled rising stars such as Matt Morgan and Magnus. Even in a smaller promotion trying to build itself as a true alternative to WWE, Hogan couldn't resist the urge to politic and manipulate. But perhaps the most infuriating part of Hogan's political legacy was his complete lack of self-awareness about the damage he caused. In a 2018 interview with the Orlando Sentinel, Hogan openly admitted to politicking, saying, "Once I got in the top spot, to keep the spot, that's where the politics come in." Even when acknowledging his behavior, he framed it as a necessary part of the business, rather than the destructive force it truly was. The lies, the scandals, the reckoning. If Hulk Hogan's backstage politicking showed his willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain, his compulsive lying and racial controversies revealed something even more disturbing, a man so disconnected from reality and basic human decency that he became a pariah among the very people who once idolized him as a leader. The lies came first, and they were so outrageous and frequent that they turned into a running joke among wrestling fans and even fellow performers. But these weren't harmless tall tales or innocent exaggerations. They were deliberate fabrications meant to inflate Hogan's ego and keep him relevant long after his prime had faded. Perhaps the most infamous of these lies was his supposed connection to the heavy metal band Metallica. If Hulk Hogan's backstage politicking showed his willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain, his compulsive lying and racial controversies revealed something even more disturbing: a man so disconnected from reality and basic human decency that he became a pariah among the very people who once idolized him as a leader. The lies came first, and they were so outrageous and frequent that they turned into a running joke among wrestling fans and even fellow performers. But these weren't harmless tall tales or innocent exaggerations. They were deliberate fabrications meant to inflate Hogan's ego and keep him relevant long after his prime had faded. Perhaps the most infamous of these lies was his supposed connection to the heavy metal band Metallica. If Hulk Hogan's backstage politicking showed his willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain, his compulsive lying and racial controversies revealed something even more disturbing: a man so disconnected from reality and basic human decency that he became a pariah among the very people who once idolized him as a leader. The lies came first, and they were so outrageous and frequent that they turned into a running joke among wrestling fans and even fellow performers. But these weren't harmless tall tales or innocent exaggerations. They were deliberate fabrications meant to inflate Hogan's ego and keep him relevant long after his prime had faded. Perhaps the most infamous of these lies was his supposed connection to the heavy metal band Metallica. If Hulk Hogan's backstage politicking showed his willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain, his compulsive lying and racial controversies revealed something even more disturbing: a man so disconnected from reality and basic human decency that he became a pariah among the very people who once idolized him as a leader. The lies came first, and they were so outrageous and frequent that they turned into a running joke among wrestling fans and even fellow performers. But these weren't harmless tall tales or innocent exaggerations. They were deliberate fabrications meant to inflate Hogan's ego and keep him relevant long after his prime had faded. Perhaps the one of the most infamous of Hogan's lies was his supposed connection to the heavy metal band Metallica, but the scandal surrounding him went far deeper than tall tales. The New Day issued a powerful statement making it clear why forgiveness was so difficult, saying, "When someone makes racist and hateful comments about any race or group of people, especially to the degree that Hogan made about our people, we find it difficult to simply forget." They stressed that their response wasn't rooted in hate, but in a demand for accountability. Even The Undertaker, one of wrestling's most respected figures, weighed in during a podcast when asked about Hogan being booed at WWE's Netflix Raw debut. Known for his professionalism and loyalty to the company, The Undertaker's reaction was simple, direct, and telling. He couldn't muster sympathy for Hogan, and that spoke volumes. When someone as reserved and guarded as The Undertaker openly shows a lack of support, it reveals just how far Hogan has fallen in the eyes of his peers. But perhaps the dead man's most damning words came when he explained why fans have turned against Hogan so completely. His analysis cut to the heart of the matter. Fans didn't reject Hogan because of one scandal. They rejected him because they finally saw who he really was behind the carefully crafted facade. The racist remarks were simply the final straw, breaking the camel's back after decades of lies, backstage manipulation, and selfish behavior. The Undertaker expanded on this point, explaining how modern technology and media had stripped away the illusion. In the past, Hogan's backstage antics might have stayed hidden from fans, but in the era of podcasts, shoot interviews, and social media, the truth about his character has become impossible to conceal. Now fans know about the union betrayal, the political games, the endless lies, and the racism, and they've passed their judgment accordingly. Steiner's hatred for Hogan runs so deep that it goes beyond professional grievances and into personal territory, and his point is crucial. The racist comments weren't an aberration or a one-time slip. They exposed who Hogan truly was when he thought no one was listening. The carefully crafted image of the all-American hero was a lie, and now everyone knew it. Current wrestlers and industry figures have been strikingly united in their criticism of Hogan. Seth Rollins, despite once being a childhood fan, called Hogan a victim of his own ego who hasn't done nearly enough to redeem himself. MVP went even further, labeling him a pathological liar and a piece of human excrement on social media, tying his anger directly to the racial slur scandal. Even AEW President Tony Khan has banned Hogan and his wife from attending AEW events, a move that reflects industry-wide disapproval far beyond WWE. This kind of universal rejection is almost unheard of for someone of Hogan's stature and historical significance. The lies, the racism, the backstage politics, and the vindictive behavior all combined to create a perfect storm of disgust that transformed Hulk Hogan from a beloved icon into a pariah. His attempts at redemption, including public apologies and WWE's partial reinstatement, have failed to repair his reputation. His ego, his refusal to fully own his mistakes, and his long history of deception continue to alienate both his peers and his fans. The tragedy of Hogan's legacy is that it didn't have to be this way. He headlined 8 of the first 9 WrestleManias, sparked the wrestling boom of the 1980s, and helped elevate the business into mainstream popularity. His contributions to the industry are undeniable and historically significant. But his personal failings, his selfishness, his racism, his lies, and his willingness to destroy others for his own benefit have overshadowed everything else. The ultimate irony is that Hogan, a man who spent his career telling kids to say their prayers and eat their vitamins, has now become a cautionary tale about the importance of character and integrity, the lies, the racism, the backstage politics, and the vindictive behavior all combined to create a perfect storm of disgust that transformed Hulk Hogan from a beloved icon into a pariah. His attempts at redemption, including public apologies and WWE's partial reinstatement, have failed to repair his reputation. His ego, his refusal to fully own his mistakes, and his long history of deception continue to alienate both his peers and his fans. The tragedy of Hogan's legacy is that it didn't have to be this way. He headlined 8 of the first 9 WrestleManias, sparked the wrestling boom of the 1980s, and helped elevate the business into mainstream popularity. His contributions to the industry are undeniable, historically significant. But his personal failings, his selfishness, his racism, his lies, and his willingness to destroy others for his own benefit have overshadowed everything else. The ultimate irony is that Hogan, a man who spent his career telling kids to say their PR